In early 1945, the war situation developed not necessarily to Germany's advantage, especially the surface fleet of the Kriegsmarine, wherein a majority of the larger surface vessels had been sunk previously. Still, some of the cruisers were operational. Notably, the remaining vessels of the Admiral Hipper class, Admiral Hipper and Prinz Eugen. The Prinz Eugen, after traversing the Atlantic with the Bismarck and braving the English Channel earlier in the war, found herself in the Baltic in early 1945, bombarding advancing columns of England. Soviet troops as they moved on the German homeland itself. Eventually she retired to Copenhagen in April and was found there by the advancing British Army in May, along with the light cruiser Nürnberg. They were taken over by the Royal Navy, and eventually Prinz Eugen was surrendered to the United States. After examining the hydrophones and other equipment, the now USS Prinz Eugen was used in multiple nuclear tests in the Pacific after. Becoming heavily irradiated, she was sunk near Kwajalein ATL 1946, where her wreck remains 1944. Today our story with Prinz Eugen begins back in mid-1944. After recommissioning in 1943 and joining the Fleet Training Group. If you want to learn more about the decommissioning of all heavy units, a link to the playlist for this series. Anyway, in June 1944, Prinz Eugen patrolled the Finnish coast north of the island of Udo, and a show of strength to cover the German withdrawal when Finland was going to leave the war in July. There wasn't much of anything to note for her service. In August, however, there was quite a bit of action as off-Cland in the Gulf of Riga. The cruiser spent 265 rounds of her main battery, 20.3 cm or 8-in guns, on Soviet positions at Tukuman, a rail and road junction, about 25 kilometers inland, while our escorting destroyers and torpedo boats engaged other targets. On the 2nd of September, she returned to Finland, following the nation bowing out of the war in mid-October. The ship sailed to Copenhagen today. What is Guinea in Poland for 5 days and attacked a little under 30 targets in the defense of the Baltic coast near Memel, expending almost 1,200 rounds of her main battery guns in company with another heavy cruiser that had recommissioned the Luto, formerly the Deutschland.
On the return to Copenhagen on the night of the 15th, at full speed, Prinz Eugen ran the light cruiser Leek, which was adrift while making a routine engine coupling transfer. Both ships remain locked together until the next day. Leipzig, although heavily damaged, remained afloat, while Prinz Eugen lost a section of her bow. She returned to Copenhagen
yards, there thanks to personal initiative of the naval senior architect Professor Burkhardt, the same man who had designed the class. A new stem was added on in a few days and tested on the 14th of November. The cruiser was again operational and on the 20th in company with the torpedo boats. T-21, T-113, T-16, and T-19 bombarded Soviet positions near the Swol Peninsula. After this, she returned to Copenhagen again, where she was scheduled for a refit and rebore of her early 1945 guns. The refit work was completed on January 15th, and only 2 weeks later, Prinz Eugen and torpedo boats covered the breakout of the 28th Corps from the bridgehead at Kingsburg, where in the defense of these troops, she expended a further 871 rounds of her main battery guns. Still, the Soviet advance could not be stopped. Shot by her own or other German guns through the coming months of winter and spring 1945, Prinz Eugen covered the retreating German army around the Baltic. Much like other ships we have discussed, like the Ludo, Admiral Hipper, and Admiral Scheer. On March 7th, the Soviets advanced on the cities of Danzig, Guinea, and Hel. Prinz Eugen was involved in the defense of those cities from March 10th on. In the defense of those cities, a total of 2,205 rounds of 20.3 centimeters and 2,446 15-centimeter shells were fired by the various ships involved in the defense during this period. Prinz Eugen also supported the old pre-Dread Sean and later the repaired Leich after Hel had been evacuated and abandoned in mid-April. Prinz Eugen eventually retired to Copenhagen on April 19th, joining the light cruiser Enberg, where, to quote, Aidan Dodson, and Serena Can, and spoils of war, the fate of the enemy fleets after 2 world wars. A considerable number of German vessels were in Danish waters at the time of the surrender in particular. Those involved in the Baltic evacuations, considerable friction resulted when Danish elements attempted to board German vessels. The latter's crews not recognizing the Danes as victors, only the British, to whom they had formerly surrendered under the May 5th agreement. Apart from the big ships, the replenishment ship Nordmark, together with T-47, T-107, T-108, and T-51 and other smaller vessels had been at Copenhagen. On May 7th, both cruisers were taken over by the Royal Navy in the coming days. On May 7th, both cruisers were taken over by the Royal Navy in the coming days. The 2 ships were escorted to Vomshaven by the cruisers Devenir and Dew, arriving in the harbor locks on the 26th of May. Prinz Eugen was lodged in the 40,000-ton floating dock in the city. But since all of her ammunition had already been shipped at Copenhagen, little else remained to be done to the heavy cruiser. On June 2nd, after a final commander parade, a large contingent of the crew was disembarked, and those remaining aboard were subjected to close watch. Nevertheless, many objects of traditional or historical value were smuggled off the ship during this period of being laid up. Allied control. The cruiser was visited by numerous high-ranking Royal Navy officers. It proved a magical attraction, especially for naval engineers of Western power. Powers the remains of the German fleet were to be divided amongst the victorious powers. For example, the cruiser Nürnberg and the gunnery target ship Hessen were eventually ceded to the Soviet Union. Prinz Eugen, on the other hand, was the creme de lame of the remaining surface units, and everybody wanted her. The USSR, because of its attempts to purchase the vessel in 1939, and a sort of prize for the bombardment of its forces over the last year of the war. The British wanted her, in part, for her role in sinking HMS Hood, and the Americans wanted her for the technology. If that's to be believed, there are some sources that say the United States didn't even want the ship, and one of the only reasons to have her was to keep her away from the Soviets. After much debate on how to decide who got the ships, lots were drawn. The lots were Lot X, which was Prinz Eugen, 1 Type 1936A destroyer, and 5 other destroyer torpedo boats. Lot Y, which was Nürnberg 4 Type 1936A destroyers, 6 other destroyers torpedo. Boats Lot Z 8 Type 1936A destroyers, 5 other destroyers and torpedo boats to take from Dodson Crank again. It was not until October 29th that the British were prepared to go ahead based on the luck of the draw, and later that day the draw took place to the consternation of the British and the Soviets. Both keen to get Prinz Eugen. Lot X fell to the Americans, Lot Y went to the USSR, and Z to the UK. This result was enshrined in the final report of the TNC, signed December 6, 1945. The Americans won, and on December 14, 1945, Prinz Eugen arrived at Bremerhaven, then an American enclave within the British zone of USS Prinz Eugen. Occupation on January 5, 1946. Prinz Eugen was commissioned into the United States Navy under the designation IS-300 to designate that she was a war prize, but retaining the name Prinz Eugen, she left German waters that day for Britain to sail her there and for technical investigations of her machinery and other technologies large part of her. German crew was retained and remustered aboard, particularly the weapons specialist, signal navigation specialist, underwater acoustic staff, and engine room staff. These were important because the Americans weren't well versed in the high-press hot steam plant. Dodson and Kant have this to say: although both Nagato and Sakawa sailed with us crew, both did not get commissioned. However, Prinz Eugen was commissioned under her original name, and the hull number was I-300 on January 5, 1946. With a composite American-German crew, she sailed from Wesemunde for Boston in January, arriving on the 22nd. The cruiser was examined on arrival, a number of her components being removed for trials and further analysis. Her passive sonar being installed in USS Flying Fish. The guns of the foremost turret were removed at Philadelphia in February, together with two 105mm mountings, a set of torpedo tubes, light AA guns, and several rangefinders. The cruiser arrived off the United States East Coast in late January, arriving in Boston on the 23rd, and then on to Philadelphia, leaving on February 11th. For the Panama Canal, which she transited on the 15th. Once in the Pacific, a comprehensive examination of the hydrophones was undertaken, and the cruiser called in San Pedro on March 24th. From April 10th to May 1st, the torpedoes were thoroughly investigated. When the German crew was no longer needed, contingents of the German crew were disembarked in 3 groups, and on May 1st, Captain Reich and the crew. Remainder of the crew were landed on May 1st, 1946. The Americans subsequently had some serious problems with the cruiser's machinery, a breakdown of all but one boiler on the passage from San Diego to Hawaii. The cruiser was brought with tug assistance to Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands via Honolulu on July 1, 1946. The first post-war atom bomb test was carried out on a group of 11 warships, including the heavy cruiser. Prinz Eugen proved resilient to the blast, and there was little damage aboard the ship. This being testable, although all animals were killed aboard the vessel, to take from heavy cruisers of the Admiral Hipper-class warships, with the Seas Marine by Gad Koop and Klus PM. Right the second a device exploded on July 25th was an underwater bomb test Baker. The ship remained a boat, but was heavily irradiated as a result. The intention to repair and recommission her was abandoned, and the hull was towed to Kwajalein ATL and anchored because of the long period she spent in tropical waters. The stuffing glands and outboard vents of the ship began to leak, and on December 22nd, she capsized. There the wreck lies today, minus various parts removed before the tests. The ship's spell hangs in the Navy Museum, Washington. The Tauf Bell is displayed at Graz, and one of the 2 propellers was obtained by the German Navy League in 1979 and mounted in front of the Naval Memorial at Lebau. The heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen and the light cruiser Enberg were the only 2 major German warships to survive the war undamaged and pass to the victors at capitulation. As Kupenschoek mentioned, conclusion, the wreck is still there today, and many people have dived wreck and explored the remains of the cruiser, which is a truly fascinating piece of history. In the description, I will put a couple of links to people who have dived the wreck, and one by Skia History about the wreck itself. This is a continuation of the series about the death of the Creeks Marina, and this one is so interesting that it needed to be its own video rather than being part of a larger video like the last couple have been. I'll probably do some more of the light cruisers here soon, if not Nürnberg itself, as I have a couple more sources is about her service in the Soviet Union. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.